It is prime cucumber season, which means what? It means pickle time. I get a lot of you asking for questions about what kind of pickles I make. Can I make this pickle, that pickle? Today is a garlic spicy dill pickle. And what's the thing about canning? You can modify the spices, the flavors to what you want. But this is really just a general recipe. It's one of my favorites, especially because pickling is quick. When you are canning pickling, you're cold packing, which means you're just putting the cold pickles into jars, making a brine, pouring it on top. It's all ready to go. For the brine, in a small kettle here, I'm gonna put some apple cider vinegar. And then I mix that with some white vinegar. Again, this is somewhat just like a preference on what you're into. So if you're not an apple cider fan, but honestly, I think it really kind of balances out the flavors. Apple cider has a little bit more of a sweetness, which I like. I think that's really good. And then it's just kind of calms it down a little bit. So I'm gonna mix it with regular white distilled vinegar. We're gonna pour that in, and then some water. Again, it just balances it out, makes a delicious brine. And then of course, to any brine, you need the salt. I use canning salt in all of my canning, so the recipes are for canning salt. Why does that matter? Canning salt is an extremely fine-grained salt. So if you use, say, a kosher salt, that's a lot bigger grains, and so it would take more to equal canning salt. So it's just something to think about. Your salt, and then I do add a little bit of honey too. A lot of old recipes call for lots and lots of sugar. I try not to use sugar, especially in my canning, but I use honey, just a little bit. We're balancing it out. So at this point, I'm gonna put this on the stove, let everything get kind of melted together, and then also gonna make sure the salt dissolves and you want it to come to a boil. So we're gonna turn that on so that can start happening. I'll give it just a quick stir here to make sure that honey and salt don't stick to the bottom. Sometimes that can happen. Then we're gonna let that sit and come to a boil. While we're doing that, we can talk about the pickles. Obviously here, cucumbers. When I get my cucumbers ready, you wanna make sure they're firm to the touch. You don't want them to be soft. You don't want them to be slick. That means they could be going bad. And then I always cut off about a 1/2 inch of the end. A lot of times, not always, but the ends can have an enzyme that makes them bitter and can make them turn a little bit softer in the jars. So for that, I'd like to just cut it off to be safe. You can cut them kind of whatever size you like to eat them with. If it's for on top of a sandwich, you might want them a little thinner. If it's just for fresh eating, you might want them thicker. You could also do spears. It really does not matter. It's just more whatever works for you. That's the best thing about canning. You modify and make it work. So we have our cucumbers, they're sliced up. Now we're gonna talk about the aromatics, the flavors. I don't like to put my flavors right into the brine because when you're going in to pour the brine on each one, they can unevenly distribute. Even though they flavor the brine somewhat, as they sit in the jar, they flavor even more. I did say these were spicy, so I'm using a Thai hot pepper. It's also called like a super chili. And just to make sure that all that heat gets in there, I give them one cut down the middle, then I just throw them in the jar. That is gonna really help those oils get out of the pepper, out of that pith and seed area, because that's really where the heat is, in that pith in the middle. And I love this color too. These are extremely hot. How do I know that? I opened one up, my eyes watered a little bit, I put my tongue on it, still feel it. So they're definitely hot. If you don't have these peppers, you could totally just add in some, I'm gonna get it here for you, some red chili flakes. I've done that before. It's a good substitute. It has a good amount of heat. You can just add that right into the jar too. So when I say you can modify, when I say you can make this work for you, guess what? I mean it. I'm gonna put these in each jar, and then I'm adding to these just because I like to amp up the flavor. I don't like something just to be hot. I also want it to be delicious. So I'm adding in some garlic. I just have some fresh garlic. Of course, I grow my garlic. Why? Because garlic is super easy to grow. No, it is. You plant it in the fall. I'm in zone 5. You harvest it in like June, sometimes July, kind of depends on the year. Delicious, simple, easy, and it's just so much better than it's gonna be in the store. So if you haven't ever gardened, you know what's good to start with? Garlic. You can't go wrong. I know I put red peppers in that one, but I still just want a pepper in it too. On fire. Now what's gonna go in are the pickles. We could put in the dill seeds at this point too, actually, but we're gonna put the pickles in first, put the dill seeds on top. Why? I'm feeling crazy today. So for the cucumbers, they were washed, they're clean, they're firm, they're cold, and I'm just gonna start putting them in the jars. This could obviously take a little bit here because you don't need to necessarily pack them tightly, but pickles, as you can see, are an odd shape. I should say cucumbers. I always call them pickles. Are you like that? Like when I go out to the garden to check them, I'll be like, I'm gonna go check my pickles. And then all those righteous people are like, you mean your cucumbers? No, you're not invited to my house if you're one of those people, okay? So I'm gonna stick them in here, and as I do it, I just kind of lightly make sure I can push them in. You don't need to make them like super tight, but the thing is, there's a lot of airspace around them, so getting them somewhat packed in there is a great idea. Because when I open a jar of pickles, I want a lot of pickles, because I like pickles. I do, I'm obsessed with anything pickled, fermented, anything. So I'm gonna keep filling up these jars, then we're gonna talk about dill. As I put the pickles in, as I've done with other things, when there's a lot of space around them, I can kind of sometimes tap them. And that just helps them make sure they're kind of falling in correctly, getting to the bottom of the jar. It always amazes me. You start with this huge pile of sliced cucumbers pretty quickly, but that's kind of what's great about pickles. It's a pretty quick process. Anything that's cold packed like this, it's a quicker process. So it's kind of nice because pickles, cucumbers, there's usually an onslaught of. You can just quickly go in, you could can 3 of them. You can just down the recipe for the brine, not do so many. So here we have our cucumbers all throughout. Now, I like a spicy dill. What does that mean? Dill seed. So you always see these beautiful big fronds of dill weed going in, and you need to put the actual flowers in, the flower heads, because that's where the seeds are. Well, you know what I like? I like just the seeds. There's tons of flavor in the seeds. That's where pretty much all the flavor is. If you don't hit the flower fronds at the right maturity time, they may not have that much flavor. And then you're taking up all that space with a big flower frond. So instead, I just like putting in some dill seed. You know you're getting that concentrated dill flavor. I smell it as I'm going, and I love that. That's what I like, you guys. The heart wants what the heart wants. So I'm coming over here and I'm checking the brine. It almost is at a boil, but before I actually start filling the jars, I like to make sure it's at a boil because you want it to be really hot, make sure that salt's dissolved, the honey's dissolved throughout. So once that is boiled, I'm gonna bring it over and we're just gonna start filling jars. Okay, so that brine came to a boil, I turned it off. Now you can just fill the jars. That's what I love about certain canning. Canning seems like such a hard, tumultuous task sometimes, but then when you get down to it, it really isn't. So we're gonna fill these all up. We want about 1/2 inch of head space. That means the space at the top of the jar, in between pretty much whatever liquid you have in there and the lid. Head space is important. It's not something that you either wanna, if you overfill a jar, 1, the lid could buckle and it doesn't seal. 2, over and under filling creates an unsafe space for botulism or different things. So that's why we talk about headspace is important. I'm gonna finish filling these up. We'll clean off the rims and then get them in the canner. We're putting in that last one. We'll see if I hit the amounts about just, oh guys, I could not have gotten that closer on the brine. You never know for sure on the brine because depending on how you pack a jar, the space the pickles take up, it can always take a little bit, a little less. I'm gonna get a spoon. I like to kind of check the fullness of a jar with a spoon. If I can, like this one, look how that pickle's sticking up. Well, that's a little too high, especially once you put the lid on. I'm gonna take that one out. It actually could probably go, yeah, over there, that'd be fine. I'm gonna check here. Again, I feel like that one's just a stitch close. Gonna take it out. I'm overzealous in packing jars. My mom would probably tell you that. I would tell you that. It's not really a secret. It's a known fact. So I'm checking too, just that liquid level. Like I said, I don't want it too full. So I'm moving them into other jars if it seems like it is. There. So now is the important task of getting those rims clean. If you get any contaminants on them, or if there'd be like a seed on them, I just like to take a little bit of hot water. This is still hot, obviously. And I put it on like something clean, a paper towel or something, and I just wipe off each rim. That just ensures that nothing is on there in between a good seal of the lid and the jar. Because, you know, after you do this work, why have anything that could go wrong? We want everything to go right. So these are all just the little steps. And obviously, I may not have mentioned this yet, the jars were sterilized. Sterilize your jars. We're gonna put all these lids on. Follow the instructions on the box to prepare the lids. Usually anymore, all you do is you wash them in hot soapy water, it says, I think. When I was younger, I know, it makes me sound like I'm an old gopher. I'm not. But when I was younger, you actually had to steep those lids in hot water. So I still have that kind of as a habit. I'm tightening these to what is called fingertip tight. I don't know, that kind of seems like canning lingo, but really what it means is you don't over tighten them and make them so tight that you can't turn anymore. That could make a lid buckle. You just turn them to what your fingertip tightness would be. So it means less than your like whole arm strength tightness. I know some of you are so strong out there. Save it. I'm just gonna bring the jars over here because it's just a little bit easier than going over the floor the whole time. My water bath is obviously boiling. You want it to be at a good boil before you put the jars in because the jars are gonna cool it down just slightly and it needs to come back to a boil before we fully count time. I should have a full canner here. Always know before you start how many jars fit in your water bath canner, which really can be any large kettle that has something in the bottom. This is a little plate that raises them up from the bottom of the pan. You don't want them to sit directly on the bottom of the pan, but know how many fit in your canner. That way, as you're getting them ready, you know how many to get ready, and you don't, you know, you might either have one short or one too many, and you don't want that. Putting these all in, we're gonna let it come back to a boil. Once it's at a boil, I'm gonna set my timer for 10 minutes, adjust for altitude, check with USDA canning guide. It tells you the exact times you need to use. Then after 10 minutes, I'm gonna take them out and we're gonna hopefully hear that wonderful ping of them sealing. These have boiled now. They have water bathed, done everything they need to do. And now we're just gonna pull them out. Always have a good jar lifter. I love these ones that have the silicone on them. Not that I've ever dropped one, but would that not be the worst? So just pull them out. The color of the pickles, of course, will change slightly. That's normal. They've been pretty much cooking somewhat, but instantly you get that. I kind of like see that? I like seeing that color of the bottom. I don't know why, I just do. I like that pepper. And also to me, that always just reminds you what kind it is, which is nice. Or if you give them away, it lets them know, fire alarm. I'm joking, they're not that hot. Always also, after you can something, even if it is a really spicy pepper, that cooking process and the heat, it tempers it slightly. So don't worry, we're not going too much. We're gonna pull all these out, and then I always put them onto a rack like that just to keep any drips, but then also the air moves around them pretty easily. You wanna let them sit 12 to 24 hours. That just lets them cool down completely. At that point, you can remove the rings. A lot of times for storage, it's recommended to remove the rings only because then you see if a lid pops during storage. A lot of you have been asking me too where I store them. I store them in the basement. I think the concept of a cool, dark place is a little bit probably old-fashioned before there was air conditioning, but just somewhere out of direct sunlight. Sunlight, since they're clear jars, can obviously somewhat degrade the flavors and just damage them over time. So anywhere out of sunlight, they should last at least a year. I'm not gonna tell you, but I've definitely kept mine over a couple years and they're fine. There you go, it's pickles. See how easy canning is and pickling can be? Spread the love, share the joy, tag people in the comments who need to see this because I think everyone needs to know how easily pickling is. And also the recipe, if you watched to this point and don't know, it's in the comments below. So go to the comment box, look for the recipe, let me know what you think and share it around. Thanks guys, let's keep pickling. I'm gonna go get more.